Greetings from Charleston, South Carolina in the USA. My name is Frank Radcliff and this is my wife, Beth. We're so thankful for the opportunity that we had to build relationships with so many of you during our travels in Southern Africa over the past year. And during that time, we had the opportunity to lead a number of marriage and parenting workshops. And during those times, we used materials by Sam and Jerry Lang called the Essential 8 Principles of a Strong Family. Now, in this series of short videos on parenting, we're going to use the same principles that they laid down here, and we're going to apply them specifically to some of the situations that we're facing in the current global health pandemic.
Yeah. You know, during this time of the pandemic, Frank and I are here alone, the two of us together, quarantined away. But we recognize that many of you may be in different circumstances that we're in, perhaps with children, and perhaps with extended family members in your home. So we reached out to our daughters, all of whom have spouses and multiple children at home now, just to see what their world's like and hopefully get some insights maybe into what your world has been like.
You know, as we shared those workshops with you, we often started in Deuteronomy chapter 6, where God is laying out his commands to Moses and to the people, and where there's so much good information there about parenting. But it always starts with a simple principle, and that's putting God first. And when Jesus talked about that same principle over in Matthew chapter 22, starting down in verse 37, here's how he said it. Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment." So as we think about what are the first things that we need to do as parents in raising our children, and the very first thing is to love God with all of our heart. Developing that relationship with God, growing in our love and passion is the first and greatest thing that we can do to have an impact on our family and on our children. And, you know, as we think about what that means for us personally, I love the verse over in Philippians chapter 1, down in verse 21, where Paul said, "For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." You know, what's most important? What do our children, what do our families, what do our friends see as what's most important to us in a practical way as we live our lives? And, you know, especially in this time when we're with them more often than we might be otherwise, when they can see us under stress and when they can see us in good times and bad, what's really most important to us usually comes out. And so as we're developing that relationship with God, it's going to be crucial to stay so close to him as we parent in this time.
Yes, absolutely. You know, as we think about first things first, I think this time right now gives us a really unique opportunity to deepen our relationship with God. You know, the world just seems upside down, and it's so many levels, and I think many of us feel like perhaps our homes and maybe even our own lives are upside down as well. You know, in Psalm 46, the psalmist describes a world that's kind of upside down to the point where he talks about the earth giving way and the mountains falling into the sea. But you know, that same psalmist also gives us hope and gives us help. In verse 1 and 2, he reminds us that God is our strength and our refuge, and he tells us we don't need to be fearful. And in verse 10 of that same psalm, he points us to God, and he says, "Be still, know that I am God." So no matter where you are right now in your walk with God, or how upside down your world may seem, whether you're doing really great or kind of barely hanging on, like many of us are, these kinds of difficult times, I think, can be some of the greatest opportunities for us to grow and to change. So how do we do that now in this kind of unknown and uncertain world? Well, I think what's most important is to go back to the basics. We all know the Bereans that Paul describes in Acts 17. He commended them for eagerly examining the scriptures every day. And I think that's who we need to become in this new world that we're living in, the Bereans again. So I'd like to suggest to you 2 things that might help you along that path. And the first is to find your routines again, and especially finding a routine as it relates to your relationship with God. You know, one of our sons-in-law used to have a 30-minute commute to work, and he used to use that time as part of his devotional time for God. But now he works from home and has a less than 30-second commute to work. He walks from the kitchen downstairs to his basement to work. One of our other daughters talked about trying to make sure she was very intentional about having quiet times during this time, so had set her alarm early to get up before the children. And they seemed to hear that alarm, and every time she said it earlier and earlier, they got up with her each time. So she's having to figure it out. But you know, this is a time of change. It's a time of distraction. It's a time of interruption. But we shouldn't be surprised by that. We should expect them and plan for it. You know, it just means we need to find a new routine, a new way of doing things if the old way didn't work. We need to be flexible and patient and have lots of grace with the situation, with ourselves, and with others. You know, the second thing I wanted to suggest to you is to really make your times with God meaningful right now. You know, when we read in Psalm 46, the verse 10 told us to be still. And I think our days right now allow us for some time of reflection. We can have time to stop and think, who am I? How am I doing? Where am I spiritually and emotionally? What is it about God that I want to dig deeper in and know more about? You know, having quiet times right now that really mean something to us and that really meet our needs, I think is going to be really critical. And that's for each of us to decide what we need and how we can get there. The other thing I think I just want to say is for those of us who are just kind of hanging in there, and that's many of us right now, I encourage you, if you can't do more, just read a psalm a day. You can draw close to God by allowing Him to strengthen you, allowing Him to comfort you in these days. And it's so important, too, to remember to pray. One of our daughters talked about how this time has really helped her draw closer to God, that she feels a deeper need for God, a deeper need to be near Him, and a deeper need to pray. And I think that's important for all of us. You know, I encourage everyone to make this time that you have with God a time you can look back on and say, those were really hard days we lived through, but my times with God in that time were really special. And as I finish, I just wanted to share some lyrics to a song that I've come to love. The lyrics say, sometimes miracles take time, and while I wait, I worship. So I hope in this time of trial and uncertainty and waiting for all of us that we take time to worship God, that we remember Him, that we put first things first and stay close to God.
Thanks, Beth. Appreciate those thoughts. You know, as we think about what Jesus said when He said to love God first, notice what it says when we continue in that. In Matthew 22, verse 39, it says, and a second commandment is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and prophets hang on these 2 commands. As we think about who our neighbors are, for those of us that are married, our closest neighbor is our spouse. That's who I wake up beside every morning. And, you know, how we love our spouses and how we help them in terms of growing in their relationship with God makes all of the difference in the world. Now, I know that some of you that are listening to this video are raising children on your own. You may be single parents or guardians, or you may be married to someone who doesn't share your faith and values. And for you, there's going to be a lot of burden that falls on you individually. But I encourage you to get that partner, that discipling partner, or that close friend that you can walk the journey with. Because because we're not intended to do this alone. You know, and as we share love with each other, and for those of us that are married, as we love our spouse, I encourage you to consider Philippians chapter 2 in verses 3 and 4, where it says, consider others better than yourselves. Look to their interests first. And so that idea of loving our spouses, or finding that close friend, if you're in the parenting journey alone, that you can share with, that you can encourage and be encouraged by, is what we ask that you do. And we want to close with a couple questions for your consideration. So share these with your spouse or with that close friend. First, what are your spiritual strengths as a disciple? And then secondly, how can you better use these strengths during this time of stress? Share that with someone close to you, and share what they have as their strengths so that you can be on the journey and be in it together. And then lastly, what challenges are you facing in your spiritual life right now? So we encourage you to share these thoughts with each other, and we encourage you to grow deeper in your personal relationship with God. We love you, and may God bless.